Hello and welcome to this recording. My name is Claire Dean and I'm an expert ACCA tutor. Today I'm going to be guiding you through this presentation, focusing on how you can enhance your FR question practice through effective debriefing and self-marking of your own answers. By answering your questions using the ACCA practice platform, you can then access the marking tool. Using this tool will effectively allow you to get the most out of your question practice and in turn help you to identify how you can improve your mark. During the session, I'll be using the marking tool to take you through the process of marking a number of constructed response questions found in section C of the FR exam. I've taken 3 different requirements from recent exams, and I've already prepared answers using the practice platform. The answers aren't necessarily designed to be perfect because I want you to identify both the good points and also the areas for improvement, with the aim of giving you the confidence to repeat this exercise on your own practice questions. Many students ask me why they got a certain mark in a mock exam or a practice question. They thought they'd done well. I filled my time, I answered all the questions, and I'm disappointed when I don't get the mark I feel I deserve. Perhaps that's how you feel. Are you baffled as to how your answers are marked? Well, sometimes it's hard to know what the examiner is looking for, especially in the analysis and interpretation question. The exam is not marked by a computer or a robot, but by a human being. And by going through the exercise of marking your own questions, you can really humanize the marker, put yourself in their shoes. The examiner does want you to pass, but you must give them every opportunity of awarding you marks and making your answers easy to mark. Looking at your own answers against the examiner's answer can help you to identify what you need to do to score well. And by self-marking, you'll be better able to understand where and why you're losing marks. From there, you can work on fine-tuning your answers to ensure you succeed. You want to strive for answers that are well laid out, clear to follow, and easy to mark. One final tip before we get started. When you come to mark your answer, it's a good idea to wait a day or certainly a few hours after attempting the question. By reading your answer with fresh eyes, it then allows you to be more objective in the reviewing and marking process. And remember, if you can't follow your own answers, what hope will the person marking your exam have? As Section A and B of the exam contain objective test questions, it's Section C, the constructed response questions, on which we're going to focus. These are the questions that are physically marked. Section C comprises 2 questions, and you are required to enter your answers into a blank word processing page or a blank spreadsheet. The first of these 2 questions requires the preparation of financial statements. This could be for a group, or instead, you might be asked to prepare financial statements for a single entity. Here, there is a wider scope for questions to require a statement of changes in equity, or an extract from the cash flow, or perhaps an adjustment to a draft profit figure. Whilst these financial statement questions are mostly computational, there could be a written element too. Then for the second question in Section C, you would typically be asked to analyse and interpret the financial statements of a single entity or a group. I'm going to use these 3 common question types to structure our session. The first requirement we'll consider is the preparation of consolidated or group financial statements. Make sure you read the question carefully so you know which financial statement or statements are required. You may find it's only extracts that are required. These questions can also ask you to provide a discussion or an explanation for some of the issues dealt with. So make sure you allocate your time in order to give each requirement in the question a fair attempt. Students typically do very well on these consolidation questions, as with practice you can be prepared. You need a good grasp of the basic principles of consolidation and know how to deal with the core adjustments, things like intragroup transactions, unrealized profit, and fair value matters. You'll prepare your consolidation on the spreadsheet, so do make sure you use the functionality of the spreadsheet. And by this, I mean, don't add up your numbers on your calculator and then type it back into the spreadsheet, because that's where errors creep in. The marker expects to be able to interrogate your cells to see how you got to a particular number. The examiner is happy for you to do your workings within a cell of the spreadsheet. However, for more complicated calculations, it's worthwhile using a separate working within the spreadsheet. For these workings, it's important they are marker friendly. Let me clarify what I mean by that. They should be clearly labelled and cross-referenced through to your consolidated answer, so the marker knows a working actually exists. Working should include text to support your numbers used in that working, as that makes it easy to follow. Don't just provide a series of numbers added together, because if you have made a mistake, the marker may find it difficult to understand where you went wrong without that supporting text. And you then run the risk of them being unable to provide follow-through marks under the own figure rule. Abbreviations are acceptable, and they will save precious minutes in the exam. Let's now see these points in practice by marking an answer I've prepared for a question of this style. Question 31 from practice test 2 is called Laurel. And in part B of this question, the requirement is to produce a consolidated profit and loss. If I now switch over to the ACCA practice platform, I'm going to jump to the marking section of the platform. And you can see I've already pre-populated an answer. I'd like you to pause the recording so you can review the question online and then take a look at my answer and consider how many marks out of 13 you would award. We'll then regroup and see if we agree. So I think I've made pretty good use of the software. I've got a well laid out answer with each of the companies identified. I spotted that Rakewood was acquired during the year, so I've time apportioned Rakewood's numbers. I have an adjustment column and I have my final column for the consolidation. Looking at the details, I've copied in the numbers for each of the companies, and then I've started working through the adjustments. And the first adjustment identified was an intercompany sale, and I have removed the intercompany sale from revenue and from cost of sales. But I didn't time apportion the adjustment. I time apportioned the revenue and the cost of sales figure for Rakewood, but not the adjustment. So from a mark perspective, the marking plan awards half a mark for the parent's number, half a mark for the subsidiary's number, and there would be half a mark for the adjustment, but I failed to time apportion, so that earns nothing. For cost of sales, much the same story. I get half a mark for the parent, half a mark for the subsidiary, and because I made the same mistake, the own figure rule applies, and I will attract the half a mark for the cost of sales adjustment, even though that number's not quite right. Now, there are other things to deal with within cost of sales. As you can see, it's not very obvious what they are. I've got a number of 2,000, which doesn't actually tie into the answer plan, and a number of 360, which again doesn't tie into the answer plan. It would have been so helpful if I'd put some narrative here to explain what those adjustments relate to. Now, the fact of the matter is the first adjustment is depreciation, fair value depreciation. And again, it's not been time apportioned. Otherwise, it's absolutely correct, but it's not been time apportioned. But again, because I've already penalised myself and not time apportioning previously, the own figure rule will still give me a full mark for that 2,000. Next, I have an adjustment for PERP, but the number's not right because I've calculated the PERP down in working 1 based on margin rather than what I should have done using markup. So I'm not going to get the full marks for there. I'm only going to get half of the 1 mark that was available. But nonetheless, a good clear working, as you can see. Then there should be another adjustment in here affecting cost of sales, which is a fair value adjustment for inventory. That was completely ignored by me, so I forfeited 1 mark. Moving down to distribution and admin, there's no adjustments around these numbers. They are simply parent plus the time apportioned subsidiary. I've got them correct, and they're each worth half a mark. For the investment income, there's half a mark for correctly cancelling the intercompany dividends from the subsidiary and the associate. The next line is the income from the associate, and there's 1 mark there for both the calculation of the income from the associate and secondly for identifying where in the P&L that line should appear. Both of those aspects I've done correctly, so that's a full mark awarded. Down to finance costs, I've got half a mark for bringing in the parent's finance costs. There are no finance costs for the subsidiary, and so you think you're done, but there should be another mark available for unwinding the discounting on the deferred consideration referred to in the earlier part of the question. The tax is 1 mark for taking the parent and the time apportioned number for the subsidiary, and so that completes the marking of my profit and loss. However, there's a further 2 marks available in the marking scheme that I will not be earning, and that's because I've forgotten to do the allocation of that profit figure of 21,860 between the group and the non-controlling interest. The examiner always comments every sitting that people forget to do this allocation, and I've fallen into that trap and lost a precious 2 marks. So altogether, what have I earned? I've earned 8 marks out of 13, so that's 62%. Instead of a groups question, you might find you're given a single entity question. And there are a variety of requirements here, from preparing financial statements from a trial balance through to adjusting a draft statement. Expect to be asked to prepare a wider range of statements compared to consolidation questions. This could include a statement of changes in equity or extracts from a statement of cash flow. And the examiner comments that both these requirements are often not attempted by students. It might be because you feel there's no point progressing to the statement of changes in equity because you think your profit and loss contains mistakes. But don't give up. You are able to get own figure marks for transferring your profit figure across to the statement of changes in equity, even if it's wrong. Before you attempt the question, make sure you're clear on the requirement. There's no point preparing a full statement when the requirement only wants an extract or an adjustment to just 1 number within that statement. The examiner advises setting up your pro forma first and leaving rows to insert extra headings or lines as you work through the question. Ensure you transfer all your numbers over from the trial balance into the pro forma, as even if there are no adjustments affecting a number, it will attract marks simply by being presented in the correct place in the financial statement. These questions will test knowledge of a range of accounting standards, and you might prefer to address the adjustments you are most familiar with first to ease yourself into the question. With panic levels likely to be high, clear workings are essential. Remember, the marker won't be able to award any own figure marks if you haven't provided a working or they can't follow it. The question may ask for a discussion of the accounting issues, but otherwise there is no need and certainly no time to provide an explanation. Finally, familiarity with the CBE environment and the available functionality of the software is vital so that you are able to quickly prepare well laid out financial statements. So let's head back to the ACCA practice platform. And this time we're going to look at question 31 Loudon from the September-December 2020 exam. And we're going to look at part A. The requirement is to prepare a schedule of adjustments to the retained earnings figure of Loudon as a result of the information provided in notes 1 to 4, and it's worth 8 marks. Now, as this doesn't fit on my screen in full, what I recommend you do is pause the recording here, go away and have a look at the full question on the ACCA website, and when you're familiar with its content, we're then going to mark my answer together. As always, I've pre-populated an answer that I'm going to share with you. So first of all, I have a retained earnings schedule, and I've got a draft figure at the top, and I've got various adjustments showing down the left-hand side. Each of these adjustments is numbered in turn, and I have then got workings for each of them shown lower down the page. If we look at the first adjustment for the loan note, there are a couple of issues that need to be corrected. First of all, the loan note has been incorrectly recorded at face value of 5 million, and instead the direct costs need to be adjusted for. That is an amount of 125, and that's correctly dealt with, and so that's going to be earning half a mark. Then we have the second problem. At the end of the year, the loan should be measured at amortized cost, and that involves calculating the finance cost for the year. Nice simple calculation, shown nice and clearly, numbers all correct, again another half a mark. Don't forget to then take those adjustments back into your schedule. So if I net them together, the 125 and the 390, that's the 265 adjustment you see up above. All looking good so far, so let's now move on to the non-current assets. Within non-current assets, we have an issue with the office, where we have an impairment during the year. To calculate the impairment, I first have to find the carrying amount at that date. So again, you can see I've got a nice clear working here with text alongside, rather than just a string of numbers added or netted together. I've taken the carrying amount at the 1st of October and I've rolled that forward by deducting depreciation through to the 1st of April. Comparing that with the fair value gives me the impairment of 3,600. Obviously, a little bit more work involved there, so that's going to probably be worth about 1.5 marks actually for that calculation. So put a mark there, and then of course don't forget to put it back into your answer. Now, you may have noticed I've used journals as I've gone along. The question didn't ask for journals. That's just something I've done for my own benefit. It certainly does help the marker, but it also encourages you to think about the debits and credits. Now, that's where my answer finishes on non-current assets, which means, unfortunately, I've forgotten to do a couple of other adjustments. Firstly, there is the depreciation. The depreciation I calculated to get to the carrying amount should also have gone through the profit and loss, because the question states that no depreciation has been charged for the year. I've calculated that depreciation. It's this amount here of 400, but I haven't posted it. Now, maybe I get lucky. Maybe the marker still gives me the 1/2 mark, but I should have put that back into my statement of adjustments. Then there's the depreciation after the impairment, given the impairment took place on the 1st of April. That I've not considered at all. So that's 1/2 mark lost. And I also failed to calculate the depreciation on the other factory buildings, which is another mark lost. So it just shows how careful you have to be reading through the question. The next issue, I felt I didn't really need a separate working because it was quite straightforward. I have the factory and I've got the disposal on the factory, and you can see I've calculated the gain on that disposal. That was worth 1/2 mark. And I'm going to award myself that 1/2 mark. Another easy adjustment was the issue number 3, probably the easiest bit of the whole question. We have a provision that's been made, an environmental provision, but at the end of the year, we need to unwind the discounting on that provision, and that is an amount of 61, calculated correctly here, and again, it's going to be worth 1/2 mark. That brings us on to the deferred tax. Definitely not a straightforward issue, so I've set out working 3 to look at this one. You can see I have the carrying amount for the asset, which is then being compared to the tax written down value to give me the temporary difference. On that, I've calculated the deferred tax. So all looking great, apart from the fact that I've forgotten to then compare the deferred tax required at the end of the year with what I already have in the trial balance. So rather than getting the full 2 marks, that's only going to be 1.5 marks. Adding all of that together, that's 5 out of 8, a very respectable 62.5%. The second question in the exam is likely to be on the analysis and interpretation of financial statements. That might be for a single entity or for a group. And you might also be asked to calculate certain ratios before you begin your analysis. Typically, students find they score low marks in these questions. So let's see what you need to do to perform well. Firstly, ensure you read the requirement really carefully. Know exactly what the examiner wants you to do. It is a question worthwhile planning. The examiner often comments that students repeat similar points when explaining the movement in different ratios, and that in general answers lack breadth. Your answers should be laid out clearly. Use a heading for each area requested, such as performance or position. And have short paragraphs and lots of spacing in your answer. It makes it easier to mark. Remember, you're trying to analyze the financial information and ratios, not just restating information. So, for example, commenting that gross profit has declined is simply an observation. To earn marks, you need to analyze why this change happened. Was it expected? Use all the information from the question. Look at the transactions and events that took place during the period and think about what impact they had on the numbers. This point is illustrated well in our next question. As for all questions, time is going to be limited, so being clear and concise is important, but bullet points are not appropriate for this question. And lastly, the examiner expects you to provide a conclusion, and marks will be awarded for this. It doesn't need to be long. Your aim is to provide a sensible conclusion that summarizes the main points of your analysis and pulls together your answer. So for our last question today, we're visiting the September-December 2020 exam, looking at question 32, Carl, part B. As before, I've pre-populated an answer, and here it is in the marking section of the practice platform. Now, I have assumed that the ratio calculation, which was worth 5 marks, has already been done, and my answer is going to focus solely on the analysis of the performance and position of the group for the last 2 years. I'd like you to pause the recording now, go away, read the question carefully, then look at my answer and award it a mark out of 8. When you're done, come back and we can see what mark I would award myself. Now, the good thing about my answer is I've split it out into the 2 requirements, financial performance and position. And I've also got the all-important conclusion at the end. I've identified that revenue increased by 6% and gross profit fell by 6%, but those are merely observations. To earn marks, I need to think about why that might be. I've noticed in the scenario that ACCA lost a customer contract during X8, so I will be expecting revenue to fall. And therefore, it shows that the rest of the group appears to have compensated for this lost revenue. But given that gross profit fell, it must be at lower margins. Good use of the information from the scenario will probably give me 1 mark for that particular observation and explanation. I'd like to then have a bit of spacing between my paragraphs before moving on to my next point, so that's something to bear in mind. And my next point is regarding the doubling of admin expenses, which has caused operating profits and return on capital employed to fall significantly. Again, more of an observation, not really very much insight there. But I've gone on to explain why the admin expenses have doubled. I noticed in the question there's been redundancies at ACCA, there was a loss on the sale of ACCA, and impairment of goodwill, all of which were captured within admin expenses. That really good use of the scenario to explain that change would earn me 2 marks. Next, I've taken those 3 items, which I've referred to here as non-recurring items, and I've added them back to see what the operating profit would be without them. And I get an operating profit of 92.9, which I've identified as comparable to the prior year. I've done the same with the operating profit margin, which also puts it in line with the previous year. And that really does prove that those 3 items identified are the reason for the change in the numbers and the ratios seen. So that would probably earn me another mark. So a really strong answer on performance. Moving on to position, I've stated the group's liquidity is improved from net current liabilities of 36 million to net current assets of 76 million. And I probably would earn half a mark for that because I did actually have to make a calculation to identify there were net current liabilities. But again, I'm looking for an analysis about why, what this tells me. I've said this is partly due to the 20 million of cash generated by the sale of ACCA. So again, good use there of the information in the scenario would earn me a mark. I've also inferred that ACCA must have had high liabilities when it left the group in order to further improve the net current liability situation. Again, another mark. Where my answer lets me down is this next statement. And that's all it is, a statement that gearing has improved from 21 to 14%. It hasn't said that that's expected. It hasn't tried to justify why it is. So unfortunately, I wouldn't expect to earn anything for a statement like that. Finally, the conclusion. Whilst the operating profit for the group has worsened this year, the disposal of the loss-making subsidiary should result in an improvement in profits in the future. So here I've taken the information from the question that Stint generated an operating loss of $17 million this year, and I've thought about what that means for the future. Again, insightful, good use of the scenario is probably going to earn me another 1 mark. It would have been nice in my conclusion if I'd added something in about the position. My conclusion only focused on performance, and that's probably the only mark out of the 8 that I've actually lost. Altogether, if we look at the summary, I've scored 7 out of 8. A really excellent answer of about 88%. So thank you so much for watching this recording. I hope you have found it's provided some insight into the constructed response questions and that you now feel confident to repeat the marking exercise on your own practice questions. I wish you the very best of luck with the rest of your studies. Thank you.